They say fate often unfolds at the most unexpected moments, in the most unassuming places, and for the most unlikely reasons. On a humid summer evening in downtown Chicago, a routine police stop set off a chain of events that would shake the city's law enforcement to its core. Officer Darren Wilcox believed he had cornered a petty loiterer, someone he assumed was just another troublemaker on a street corner. Little did he know, the man he was about to cuff and humiliate was actually a high-ranking FBI agent, deep in undercover work, and in that single, tense encounter, everything changed. The night air clung to the buildings in downtown Chicago like a heavy blanket. It was the type of August humidity that made each breath feel like a chore. Many people hurried along the sidewalks, trying to get to cooler, air-conditioned spots. Traffic was heavier than usual due to a local music festival wrapping up in Grant Park. Horns blared every so often, muffled into the general hum of city life. Under yellow-hued streetlights stood Marcus Reynolds, a tall black man in his early 30s, wearing a loose-fitting shirt, baggy jeans, and well-worn sneakers. He looked like he was taking in the night, leaning casually against a wall next to a Starbucks on East Jackson Boulevard. From a distance, Marcus appeared to be exactly the kind of man local cops might eye suspiciously at this time of night, a bit scruffy, nondescript, alone. But if you looked closer, you might notice the quiet confidence in his posture. Marcus's eyes were always scanning, measuring, and noting every detail around him. The man who walked by 3 times in a hooded jacket, the battered SUV that crawled past, its driver glancing pointedly at the Starbucks entrance. Marcus wasn't a mere bystander, he was working. And though his attire suggested an average streetwise individual, he was in fact a highly trained FBI agent investigating a series of gang-related extortions that had recently plagued the neighborhood. Marcus carried only a small phone and a few everyday items, no badge in plain sight, no sidearm visible. His mission depended on blending in with the very people the Chicago PD often stopped and questioned. He had been on the ground for weeks, gathering intelligence on a well-organized group extorting local businesses. By keeping a low profile, he was able to befriend a few small-time hustlers who'd unknowingly fed him breadcrumbs about their ruthless employers. Marcus was close, he could feel it, to cracking the ring wide open. All he had to do that evening was wait for a contact who'd promised new information, a location, a name, anything that might lead him to the higher-ups behind the extortion scheme. He glanced at his phone. 9:45 p.m. The contact was late, which worried Marcus. The entire investigation hinged on gaining trust with these street-level players, and tardiness could signal many things. Possibly they'd realized who he really was, or maybe they'd gotten cold feet. Marcus thought of calling it a night, but forced himself to remain calm. If he left too soon, he might lose a potential lead. And so he stayed, scanning passers-by, ignoring the discomfort of the thick air and the suspicious glances from people who wondered why he lingered near the Starbucks after it closed. Meanwhile, Officer Darren Wilcox was about to complete the end of his shift. A 10-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department's Honest District, Wilcox prided himself on proactive policing. He believed in confronting anyone who looked like they were up to no good. Some said he had a nose for crime. Others whispered he had a tendency toward bias, judging people for how they looked or dressed. Tonight, Wilcox was determined to rack up one last bit of quality policing before clocking out. He'd had a slow day, only a few traffic tickets and a nuisance call at a downtown restaurant. The festival crowd was rowdy but not necessarily criminal. Wilcox's desire for excitement, or maybe just a sense of self-importance, led him to fixate on the lone man near Starbucks. From his patrol car parked across the street, Wilcox eyed Marcus with mounting suspicion. "Loitering," he mumbled under his breath. "He's been standing there for at least half an hour." His partner that evening, Officer Alicia Gomez, was scanning the sidewalk for potential drug activity. She was younger, new to the department, and more cautious than Wilcox. When she turned to see where Wilcox's attention lay, she questioned whether it was worth a confrontation. There wasn't any pressing sign of criminal activity. However, Wilcox felt that no one innocent would stand by a closed Starbucks for so long. He wanted to check it out. Wilcox stepped out of the squad car, instructing Gomez to follow. Approaching Marcus, they saw he looked calm, hands tucked into his pockets, seemingly minding his own business. The officer set his jaw, stiffened his back, and put on an authoritative expression. This was the moment Wilcox always enjoyed, making his presence known, letting the suspect know who was in charge. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm and tinged with condescension. "Do you have a reason to be standing here?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the abrupt confrontation. But he'd been in similar situations before he understood how to handle them. Calmly, he turned to face Wilcox. "I'm just waiting for someone," he answered. Wilcox's eyes narrowed. "At a closed Starbucks?" he asked. "It's almost 10 at night. You realize you're loitering, right?" Marcus remained polite. "I wasn't aware it was a crime to stand on a public sidewalk, and it's near a well-lit place, which I prefer." Officer Gomez, standing slightly behind Wilcox, shifted on her feet, sensing the tension. She studied Marcus's posture, noticing that he didn't appear defensive or aggressive. The night's thick heat made the scene more stifling, but Wilcox pressed on, ignoring any sense of nuance. "Let's see some ID," he demanded. Marcus had a careful response pre-planned for such encounters, but never did he blurt out his FBI identity. He simply complied politely because he didn't want to jeopardize his mission. The ID in his wallet bore the name Victor Green, his undercover alias. It wouldn't hold up under a thorough check, something only local police had the means to do quickly if they suspected deeper deception, but typically, if he was polite, officers would let him go after a quick once-over. Still, as he pulled out his wallet, a wave of tension went through him. He handed the ID over, noticing Wilcox glance at it with suspicion. The officer's brow furrowed when he read the name. "You live around here, Mr. Green?" Wilcox asked, his tone laced with doubt. "Not far," Marcus lied, maintaining his cover. "Trying to meet a friend who's running late." Officer Gomez glanced at the ID, then at Marcus's face. Something about the situation felt off. She wasn't sure if it was the name, the story, or the unwavering calm in Marcus's voice. And yet, as a rookie, she deferred to Wilcox for the next steps. Wilcox scoffed. "You don't look like you're from this neighborhood," he spat. Then, as though revealing some crucial piece of evidence, he said, "You said you were waiting for a friend, but you've been here for nearly an hour. People have been complaining. They say you're lurking." Marcus felt a twinge of annoyance as Wilcox's insinuations took a more hostile turn. He reminded himself to stay composed. The last thing he needed was to arouse suspicion that he was more than he appeared. And certainly he had no interest in escalating the situation into a larger conflict that could blow his cover or worse. "I'm not lurking," Marcus said patiently. "I can move along if it's a problem. I'm not here to cause trouble." Officer Gomez's eyes flickered from Marcus to Wilcox. She sensed the tension mounting, but Wilcox wasn't ready to let it go. Something about Marcus's demeanor seemed to set him off. The older officer seemed determined to assert his authority. "You're loitering, and that's reason enough to investigate," Wilcox said, stepping closer. "What's in your pockets? You carrying anything illegal?" At that, Marcus grew concerned. He had no contraband, of course, but he also had a phone containing sensitive messages between him and his FBI colleagues. Letting Wilcox search him could jeopardize the entire case. He quickly weighed his options. If he resisted, that could escalate into an arrest. If he complied, they'd discover conflicting details in his cover story or, at worst, discover his FBI phone. Marcus tried to defuse the situation calmly. "Officer, with all respect, I'd prefer you not search me without cause." "I have a right," Wilcox cut him off. "Cause? You're loitering in a known high-crime area. That's cause enough." Turn around, Marcus looked at Officer Gomez, hoping for some measure of reason. She appeared uneasy, but still deferred to her senior partner. For a moment, Marcus considered revealing his identity, but he couldn't do that lightly. Uncovering himself might sabotage months of undercover work. He hoped that by staying calm, the officer might lose interest. However, as Wilcox's tone grew sharper, Marcus realized the man wasn't going to back down. The confrontation escalated. Wilcox reached for Marcus's arm, determined to frisk him. Marcus instinctively pulled away, which caused Wilcox to bark, "Stop resisting." The phrase echoed across the empty sidewalk, and a few late-night passers-by paused. Marcus raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not resisting," he said, controlling his voice, "but I have the right to ask why you're searching me." Wilcox's eyes shone with a mixture of anger and triumph, as if he'd cornered a criminal. "That's it. Turn around, hands on the wall," he ordered. "Officer Gomez, cover me." There was a small flash of uncertainty on Gomez's face, but she did as told, placing her hand near her holstered weapon. Wilcox spun Marcus around and roughly patted him down. Onlookers watched in uneasy silence. It was a scene that wasn't particularly new in this part of the city, another black man being manhandled by a cop who believed he had found a threat. Marcus, forced against the brick wall, let out a slow breath. The situation was volatile, and he had to act carefully. He couldn't risk a full search, discovering his phone's hidden compartments. If Wilcox found them, not only would Marcus's cover be blown, but an entire FBI operation would be compromised. Once the pat-down began, Wilcox discovered only a wallet, keys, and a cell phone in Marcus's pockets. Nothing else. No drugs, no weapons, no suspicious paraphernalia. Marcus's calm demeanor never wavered. This lack of evidence might have caused a more level-headed officer to let him go with a warning, but Wilcox's pride and frustration refused to yield. The fact that Marcus continued to stand there, stoic, made the officer dig in his heels. "You think you're smart, huh?" Wilcox hissed, shoving Marcus a bit harder than necessary. "I bet you have a record." Marcus exhaled, feeling his anger threaten to break through. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong," he said, his voice tight but controlled. "You've searched me. There's nothing." Wilcox gestured for Gomez to run the ID through their system. She took the wallet, heading to the squad car. Marcus's heart pounded. The ID might be flagged in some FBI database as part of his undercover identity, but local police wouldn't see that. However, if anything went awry, if there was an outdated detail or a mismatch, things could turn ugly. In the silence that followed, Wilcox kept a hard grip on Marcus's arm, leaning in to intimidate him. "I've seen men like you cause trouble before, hanging around, eyeing up potential marks. I'm not letting you slip away if you're up to something." Meanwhile, in the patrol car, Officer Gomez typed Marcus's alias, Victor Green, into the system. She felt a pang of guilt. There was something about Wilcox's approach that made her uneasy. His hostility seemed beyond professional suspicion. Nevertheless, she tried to do her job, double-checking the name, date of birth, and address from Marcus's ID. The system took its time searching. When the results finally popped up, they were inconclusive. There was no outstanding warrant, no rap sheet, no record at all. Victor Green appeared to be an ordinary citizen with no reason to raise alarms. That discovery left Gomez uncertain. She reported these findings to Wilcox over her radio. "Nothing on him," she said quietly, her voice projecting out of the patrol car's open door. Wilcox's jaw tightened. He knew it meant he had no legitimate grounds to hold Marcus. But Wilcox wasn't ready to let go. Anger flickered in his eyes as he looked at Marcus, who remained pinned against the wall. "No record, huh?" the officer said sarcastically. "You got lucky, or maybe your info's fake." Marcus realized this had gone too far. He was torn. His job was to stay undercover, and revealing his true identity would jeopardize an entire operation. But he also worried that if he continued to refuse, Wilcox might use brute force or even cuff him. As Wilcox started pulling out handcuffs, presumably for a formal detainment on a trumped-up charge, Marcus made a split-second decision. He had promised his superiors he'd only reveal himself in an emergency, but right now he saw no other option. He had to protect the operation from unraveling, but also protect himself. "Officer," Marcus said, voice calm but urgent, "I need you to check one more thing." Wilcox sneered. What could that be? Before responding, Marcus very slowly reached into his back pocket. Wilcox tensed, thinking Marcus might be going for a weapon. Gomez, seeing what was happening from near the car, placed her hand on her holster again. But Marcus carefully produced a single, folded piece of paper. "Inside this," Marcus continued, "there's a name and a number. You should call it right now, on speaker. You'll get your answers." Wilcox's suspicious glare deepened. "You playing games with me?" he asked, voice low. Marcus shook his head. "Please, just do it." Confusion rippled across Wilcox's face. Typically, suspects didn't calmly offer phone numbers to clear their name. He stared at Marcus, then at the folded paper. Finally, with a dramatic sigh, meant to show he was still in control, Wilcox snatched the paper and opened it. Scrawled in neat handwriting was a name: Assistant Director Harold Morrison, Federal Bureau of Investigation, alongside a number. Wilcox froze, his bravado fading just a bit. He looked up at Marcus, then back at the name on the paper. The mention of the FBI alone made the officer's pulse speed up. "Where'd you get this?" Wilcox demanded. Marcus simply held his gaze. "Call him." "You'll find out." Officer Gomez, picking up on the tension, walked back over. Wilcox handed her the slip. "Do me a favor, rookie," he said. "Call this number." Gomez dialed, her hands trembling a bit. She put the call on speaker. 3 rings later, a crisp, authoritative voice answered, "Morrison here." Gomez cleared her throat. Yes, Mr. Morrison, this is Officer Alicia Gomez with the Chicago Police Department. I'm calling about a man named—" She glanced at Marcus. "Victor Green." There was a momentary pause. Then Morrison replied in a cautious tone, "Why are you calling me about him?" Gomez looked at Wilcox, uncertain how to proceed. Wilcox grabbed the phone. "Officer Wilcox here, Chicago PD. We have this individual for loitering, suspicion of illegal activity. He claims we should call you." Morrison's voice tensed. "Put him on." Wilcox rolled his eyes but held the phone out toward Marcus. Marcus spoke into the phone, still pinned against the wall. "Sir, it's Reynolds," he said, using his real last name. "I was compromised in an encounter with local law enforcement. I'm currently being detained." Officer Wilcox's face twisted in confusion as he realized that Victor Green apparently had another name. Meanwhile, Morrison's voice came through the speaker in a calm but firm bark. "Officer, let Mr. Reynolds speak freely, immediately." The harsh, commanding tone made Officer Gomez take a step back, but Wilcox bristled. "And who exactly are you to be giving orders?" "You're speaking to Assistant Director Harold Morrison of the FBI," Morrison replied icily. "Now let Agent Marcus Reynolds go. Right now." In that moment, a hush fell over the sidewalk. The onlookers who remained shifted in surprise. Marcus closed his eyes, mentally preparing for what would come next. Wilcox, stunned into silence, took a hesitant step back and released his grip on Marcus's arm. "This guy an FBI agent," Wilcox mumbled, disoriented. Marcus turned around, rolling his shoulders. trying to ease the tension in his muscles. He didn't gloat, though the relief he felt was immense. Gomez, looking shell-shocked, stared at the man she had assumed was some random suspect. "Yes, he's an FBI agent," Morrison continued through the phone, voice resonating with controlled anger. "Now, unless you want to be cited for interfering with an active federal operation, I suggest you apologize and let him continue his business. Then we can discuss your conduct at the station later." All color seemed to drain from Wilcox's face. The sudden shift from having a helpless suspect to confronting a federal agent was staggering. For a moment, he said nothing, weighing his pride against the potential repercussions of defying the FBI. Marcus rubbed his wrists where Wilcox had grabbed him. "Officer, do you mind removing your hand from your cuffs?" he asked, his tone controlled. Wilcox swallowed hard. He fumbled to unclip the cuffs from Marcus's belt loop, stepping back. In the phone's speaker, Morrison took a measured breath. "Agent Reynolds, you are free to continue your assignment. Officers, you'll be hearing from Internal Affairs and the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility. This incident will be investigated." The finality in Morrison's words hung in the thick Chicago air like a thundercloud about to break. Gomez lowered her gaze. She knew this was bad, possibly career-altering for Wilcox. Meanwhile, Wilcox stood rigid, as if trying to collect himself, not daring to say more. Marcus took the phone. "Thank you, sir." He ended the call, sliding the piece of paper back into his pocket. The entire crowd watched, waiting for what might happen next. Marcus studied Wilcox, the man's breath coming in short, angry bursts. It was clear the officer wanted to lash out, but was suddenly powerless. Agent Reynolds, Wilcox finally spat, bitterness dripping from every syllable. "You could have said something sooner." Marcus gave him a measured look. "That might have jeopardized my mission. I tried to comply. You took it to another level." There was nothing Wilcox could say to that. His eyes flicked around, noting the passers-by who had slowed to witness this humiliating reversal of fortune. The policeman's face burned with anger and embarrassment. Gomez looked at her partner with pity and concern, fully aware that their shift had just become far more complicated than expected. Marcus stepped away from the wall, smoothing out his clothes. Although the immediate threat was over, his cover was effectively blown, at least with these two cops. He had to mitigate the damage. "I'd appreciate it if you two kept this to yourselves," he said quietly. "I have an ongoing operation. We both know how easily word can spread." Gomez nodded quickly, a bit of guilt and fear in her eyes. She seemed genuinely remorseful for her part in what had happened. Wilcox, however, wore a stony expression. "You expect me to just forget this?" he asked. Marcus sighed. "I expect you to do your job without prejudice, officer. I'm not the enemy. And you just risked messing up a federal investigation." The tension in the air was thick. Officer Gomez cleared her throat. We should get back in the car," she said, softly, glancing at Wilcox, hoping he wouldn't escalate things further. Wilcox hesitated, wrestling with the humiliating truth that the man he had tried to arrest for loitering was, in fact, a federal agent. Without another word, he turned abruptly and strode back to the squad car, leaving Gomez to follow. Marcus remained where he stood, watching them go. His contact never showed that night. The fiasco had likely scared them off, but an even bigger storm was about to brew. Word about the confrontation spread quickly within the precinct. It started with an unnamed bystander's cell phone footage that appeared on social media, though the video was shot in poor light and had muffled audio. It clearly showed a white Chicago police officer aggressively searching an unarmed black man who, moments later, turned out to be an undercover FBI agent. Rumors flooded the station. Some cops laughed it off. Wilcox messed with the wrong guy, while others shook their heads, worried about potential fallout for the entire department. At the same time, Internal Affairs caught wind of the incident. They approached the FBI for more details, and the FBI's own Office of Professional Responsibility, OPR, got involved. A joint investigation began. Interviews were scheduled. The question wasn't just whether Wilcox had used excessive force, but also whether a deeper pattern of bias influenced his policing tactics. Meanwhile, Marcus filed a detailed report of the incident to his superiors. He worried the fiasco might compromise his mission. As it turned out, his contact had vanished. The address Marcus visited the next day was deserted, and any lead that might have come from that meeting evaporated overnight. He tried not to let resentment fester, but the frustration was real. Months of delicate undercover work might have been jeopardized because a local cop refused to see him as anything but a loitering suspect. Nevertheless, the FBI decided to keep Marcus on the case, ordering him to lie low for a while. Assistant Director Morrison assured him that the Bureau would handle the fallout with the Chicago PD. "We can't let one officer's mistake destroy the entire operation," Morrison said in a private meeting at the Chicago field office. "But watch your back. We can't have you flagged by every patrol car in the city." Marcus nodded, tense but resolute. He'd come too far to let a botched encounter derail his mission entirely. Yet, the weight of that night's events settled on him. He had been singled out for little more than standing on a sidewalk. He thought he was used to it, having grown up in neighborhoods where being a tall black man came with certain assumptions. But this time, it was personal. He'd been pinned by prejudice at the exact moment he was risking everything to bring genuine criminals to justice. While Marcus grappled with the consequences for his investigation, Officer Darren Wilcox found himself at the center of a departmental firestorm. He had to meet with Internal Affairs to provide a statement. The Chicago Tribune picked up the story after the short video clip went semi-viral. A headline in the Tribune's online edition read, "CPD officer attempts to arrest undercover FBI agent in alleged racial profiling incident." Wilcox came into the station the next morning to hushed whispers and sideways glances. The older cops gave him pitying looks, some offering half-hearted slaps on the back, telling him to hang in there. Others shook their heads, not wanting to get too close to a man who might soon be suspended or fired. For Wilcox, the humiliation was suffocating. He never saw himself as a racist, at least. He told himself that. In his mind, he was just being vigilant. Hadn't he arrested dangerous people loitering on corners before? Some of them had turned out to be gang members, drug dealers, or worse. But this time, he'd messed up. He tried to rationalize it, but the news coverage was brutal, painting him as a poster child for the exact prejudices the department was trying to reform. The day after the incident, Wilcox was called into a meeting with his precinct captain, Captain Elaine Barrow, a woman known for her strict adherence to protocol. He entered her office, noting the tension in the air. His union representative, a tough, no-nonsense man named Larry Fields, sat in the corner with arms folded. Captain Barrow motioned for Wilcox to sit. She pinned him with a glare that could wilt flowers. "Officer Wilcox," she began, "we have a problem. The FBI has lodged a formal complaint about your interaction with Agent Marcus Reynolds. Internal Affairs is investigating, and the mayor's office is paying very close attention." Wilcox shifted uncomfortably. "M-A-A-M-I." She held up a hand to stop him. "Before you speak, I want you to understand the gravity of this. You've placed yourself, this department, and the city in a precarious position. If the FBI agent's statements and the video footage confirm that you used excessive force or racially profiled him, we are looking at serious disciplinary measures." Larry Fields cleared his throat. "Officer Wilcox has the right to defend himself. We haven't seen the full footage or read the agent's statement yet." Barrow nodded, eyes steely. Yes, and IA will gather all of that. In the meantime, Wilcox, I have no choice but to put you on desk duty until further notice. Hand over your badge and service weapon. Wilcox's stomach churned. His sense of identity was tied to that badge. He surrendered it with a trembling hand. The muzzle of his gun scraped the desk as he placed it down. Captain, I didn't mean... She exhaled sharply. What you meant doesn't matter now. What matters is how we proceed. If the investigation finds evidence of misconduct, you will be suspended or worse. Do you understand? Wilcox nodded, unable to speak. He felt a numbness spread through him as he rose from the chair, the finality of that meeting pressing down on his chest. A week passed. Marcus tried to salvage his FBI investigation. He set up new meeting points, reached out to old contacts, and tried to reassure the local business owners that he was still just a friend from the streets, not an FBI informant. But rumors spread fast, and the fiasco with CPD had put him in an awkward spot. He still managed to pick up bits and pieces of information about the extortion racket, but the trust he'd built was eroding. At the same time, the FBI's internal investigation turned up more details. Marcus was asked to describe, in writing, every aspect of the encounter with Wilcox. He had to be honest. He reported the aggressive tone, the immediate assumption of wrongdoing, the rough pat-down. When the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility read it, they shared it with IA. Combined with the short social media video, the evidence painted a grim picture of Wilcox's behavior. For many in the FBI office, the story was symbolic of a broader issue. Agents privately discussed that they often faced friction with local cops who underestimated or mistrusted them, especially when race was involved. Marcus heard these whispers but tried to remain professional. He told himself that not every cop was like Wilcox. In fact, a few local officers had been helpful in the past, but the sting remained. One morning, Marcus was summoned to the Chicago FBI field office to meet with Assistant Director Morrison and a stern-faced woman from the Department of Justice, Patricia Kimball. Marcus assumed it was about finalizing his statement. He arrived wearing his typical casual attire, a reminder that he was still operating undercover. Morrison met him in the corridor. "Reynolds, we have a new development," he said. "We're bringing the hammer down on Wilcox." Marcus's stomach lurched. "What do you mean?" Kimball answered, a folder tucked under her arm. "The Department of Justice is launching a broader civil rights investigation into the Chicago Police Department. Officer Wilcox's case might be part of a pattern of unlawful policing. Your testimony is crucial." Marcus's eyes widened. "A federal investigation into the CPD? That's massive." Morrison nodded. "There have been ongoing concerns. This incident could be the catalyst. Now, we realize your mission is still important, but we may need you to testify if this goes to trial." Marcus inhaled sharply. He understood the importance of the bigger fight, ensuring that police misconduct was addressed. But the weight of testifying, especially while he was still undercover, loomed large. What about the extortion ring? My cover might be completely shot if I appear in any legal proceeding. Kimball cleared her throat. "We'll do everything we can to maintain your anonymity. But this is bigger than one case. If we find a systemic issue, we have a duty to pursue it." Marcus nodded reluctantly. "I get it," he said. "I'll cooperate. But I hope we can still bring down the extortionists. We've been working on that for months." As the DOJ prepared their initial inquiries, Officer Alicia Gomez felt torn by guilt and confusion. She had been present during the entire incident. While she hadn't used force, she hadn't stopped Wilcox either. Her conscience ate at her, reminding her that she had the duty to speak up when she saw something wrong. She was called in by Internal Affairs to give her statement. Sitting in a stark interview room, she faced two IA officers who recorded every word. "Officer Gomez," one of them said, "in your own words, describe the events of that night." She took a breath. "We saw Mr. Agent Reynolds standing near the Starbucks. Officer Wilcox believed he was loitering. I asked if it was worth questioning, but Wilcox insisted." She recounted how Wilcox took the lead, how he confronted Marcus, how the tension escalated. "Did you notice any reason to suspect Agent Reynolds of criminal activity?" Gomez hesitated, then shook her head. "No. He was just standing there. I didn't see him approach anyone or do anything suspicious. When Wilcox demanded a search, he didn't resist. He just wanted to know the reason." The IA officers scribbled notes. "Did you believe Officer Wilcox acted within policy?" Tears pricked the corners of her eyes as she recalled how she'd felt that night. I knew something was off, but he was my partner. I was new, and I didn't speak up." That candid admission would resonate through the entire chain of command. It was a statement of complicity, of failing to intervene. However, it also showed her willingness to acknowledge wrongdoing. The IA officers gave her a sympathetic nod before ending the interview. That day, Gomez left feeling a mixture of relief and dread. Meanwhile, Wilcox stewed at his desk job. He spent his days filing reports, processing paperwork, and avoiding the curious gazes of fellow officers. Every time he passed a colleague in the hallway, he felt the burn of judgment or pity. The phone on his temporary desk rang constantly with inquiries from union reps, internal affairs, or the media. The department's press office was swamped with requests for comment, all culminating in the same question: how could an officer misjudge a situation so badly that he tried to arrest an undercover FBI agent? Wilcox felt anger, embarrassment, and fear swirling within him. He kept telling himself that if Reynolds had just explained who he was from the start, none of this would have happened. In his private moments, however, he fought a more uncomfortable realization. Maybe he'd been too quick to assume the worst, because Reynolds was a tall black man standing alone at night. That thought gnawed at him, forcing him to confront his biases, something he'd spent a career dismissing as just good policing. Eventually, Wilcox received a summons from the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, requesting an interview regarding the events. When he arrived at their local offices, he was escorted into a conference room where two FBI agents waited. One was an older man with silver hair, the other a woman with a clipboard. They gestured for Wilcox to sit. He felt small under their scrutinizing eyes. "Officer Wilcox," the silver-haired agent began, "we want to hear your account. This is standard procedure, but we're also investigating any potential interference with a federal operation." "That's a serious matter." Wilcox swallowed. "Yes, sir, I understand." The agent nodded. "So walk us through your thought process. Why did you confront Agent Reynolds?" Wilcox explained he'd observed loitering, which he believed was suspicious because of the late hour and the area's history of crime. He recounted the pat-down, the refusal to produce certain documentation, and the eventual reveal that Reynolds was FBI. The agent raised an eyebrow. Did Agent Reynolds refuse to comply, or did he simply question why you were searching him? Wilcox's jaw worked. He realized how damning the distinction might be. He asked for a reason, and your response was to push him against the wall and handcuff him, the agent pressed. Wilcox forced his tone to remain level. "I considered him uncooperative." The agent exchanged a look with his colleague. "In that scenario, are you aware that lack of immediate compliance doesn't necessarily constitute suspicion or probable cause for an arrest?" Wilcox felt his cheeks burn. "I was following standard procedure for the area," he mumbled. The agent tapped his pen against his notes. "We'll review everything, including the footage." If we find that your actions constituted an unlawful stop or excessive force, you may be liable. We take interference with federal investigations very seriously. The tension in the room was palpable, and by the end of the interview, Wilcox could barely stand to look either of the agents in the eye. He left with a heavy weight pressing down on his conscience. Days turned to weeks. The Department of Justice probe into CPD practices began quietly, with teams reviewing past complaints and examining patterns of racial disparities in policing. Wilcox's case was just the tip of the iceberg. Agents and lawyers rummaged through a decade's worth of data, including arrests, stops, use of force reports, and complaints from community members. At the same time, Marcus continued his undercover role, albeit more cautiously. He arranged discreet meetings, making sure not to stay in one place too long. One night, his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. It read, "Heard you got trouble with the cops. We can't meet. Too hot right now." The message confirmed what he feared: his cover was compromised in the eyes of local criminals. They sensed something wasn't right. Still, Marcus pressed on, eventually finding a smaller fish in the extortion ring, a man named Oscar, who was desperate to save his own skin. Oscar let slip the name of a mid-level enforcer, a detail that could help unravel the operation from the inside. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. The next step was to set up a meeting with the enforcer, but that meant venturing deeper into potential danger. Marcus reported to Morrison, who agreed on a plan. They'd keep Chicago PD mostly in the dark, for fear that someone might leak details that could endanger Marcus. Tensions between the Bureau and the local force were already sky-high due to the ongoing investigation, so it was decided to handle this lead as quietly as possible. During this period, Officer Gomez reached out to Marcus privately. She managed to get his number from a contact at the FBI. At first, he was suspicious of her call, but she quickly explained she had no ill intent. She just needed to talk. They met in a neutral place, a nondescript diner by the highway, far from the watchful eyes of the precinct. Gomez wore civilian clothes, looking anxious as she sipped a cup of coffee. Marcus joined her, scanning the surroundings. "I'm sorry," she began softly. "I should have spoken up that night." Marcus regarded her calmly. "You were in a tough spot. I get it." Gomez shook her head. "That's no excuse. Part of our training is to intervene if we see another officer doing something wrong." I froze. I guess I was scared. Wilcox was my senior partner, and I didn't want to start conflict. "I regret that." Marcus nodded, sympathy mingling with lingering frustration. "It's complicated. Law enforcement is hard, but if I hadn't been FBI, would you be here apologizing right now?" Her eyes glistened with tears. "I'd like to think so, but maybe you're right. It's because you're with the Bureau that everything blew up." "Still, I want to do better." Marcus sighed. "Look, I appreciate your honesty. I'm not out to destroy the CPD. I come from a law enforcement family too. But some things need to change." They talked for over an hour, Gomez opening up about her struggles as a Latina officer often caught between community mistrust and departmental pressure. Marcus recognized parallels in his own experience as a black man in the FBI, a minority in a predominantly white federal agency. By the time they parted, there was a mutual respect and an unspoken hope that, perhaps, things could shift for the better, though neither knew quite how that might happen. Meanwhile, Wilcox's personal life crumbled. His spouse, Linda, was worried sick. She noticed his nightly tossing and turning, the frantic phone calls from union reps, the hush that fell whenever his case was mentioned on the local news. Their finances were on shaky ground, desk duty cut into overtime pay, and the possibility of suspension loomed. Wilcox snapped Linda over minor issues, and tension in their home escalated. One afternoon, Linda confronted him. "Darren, you need to figure this out. We can't live in limbo forever. The kids are asking why you're never in uniform anymore. What am I supposed to tell them? Wilcox rubbed his temples. I'm handling it, okay? The union says they're pushing back against the FBI's claims. They want me to keep quiet, not to admit anything. They say it could blow over. She laid a hand on his shoulder. Will it? He said nothing, just staring at the wall. Deep down, he wasn't sure. As the DOJ investigation deepened, Captain Barrow discovered that Wilcox had multiple civilian complaints in his file, most never pursued due to lack of evidence. But now, as federal investigators combed through CPD records, every complaint was back under the microscope. A pattern of stops targeting black men in similar circumstances began to emerge. IA questioned Wilcox again. This time, they brought up the old complaints. Mr. Thomas Jenkins says you stopped him without cause in April last year. Filed a complaint. Do you recall that incident? Wilcox scratched his head, trying to recall. Maybe. He was loitering too. The area was known for drug deals. The IA officer tapped a paper. He claims you roughed him up, used racial slurs. Wilcox's eyes flashed with indignation. That's not true, he insisted, but the more the investigators pressed him, the more uncertain he felt. He may not have used slurs, but had he been rough? Had he singled out Jenkins simply because he looked suspicious in Wilcox's eyes? And so it went, complaint after complaint, each painting a picture of a man who, at best, was overeager to confront black citizens and, at worst, a bigot with a badge. Wilcox couldn't mount a convincing defense, besides insisting he was just doing his job. Amid the departmental chaos, Marcus pursued his lead on the extortion ring. He orchestrated a meeting with the mid-level enforcer, a man named Cedric C. Dorsey, who'd been collecting protection money from local shops. Their rendezvous took place in a dimly lit back room of a rundown billiards hall on Chicago's South Side. C was suspicious from the start. You're that guy that got into it with the cops downtown, huh? He said, squinting in the gloom. Marcus shrugged casually. Cops always messing with me. You know how it is. C smirked. Maybe. Or maybe they was on to something. Marcus laughed it off. They didn't find nothing but my phone and some loose change. He tried to look unimpressed, like any streetwise hustler who'd been harassed by the police. So, what's the word? You got something going on, or what? The conversation danced around the extortion scheme. Marcus knew not to push too hard. He let C boast about the easy money from certain businesses, dropping vague hints about the bigger players. Marcus nursed a lukewarm beer, feigning a hunger to move up in the ranks. After an hour, he felt he'd gleaned enough intel to pass to the bureau. But as he made his exit, C grabbed his arm. You watch yourself, man, he said, voice low. Word is, some of the big dogs ain't sure about you. You slip up, you're gone. Marcus offered a reassuring grin. Don't worry about me. But the warning settled in his gut, a reminder that any slip could be fatal. Outside, the thick Chicago night pressed in. Marcus quickly texted Morrison a coded message indicating the meeting went well. He hopped into his old sedan and drove off, scanning the rearview mirror for any sign of a tail. The city lights streaked past, and as he turned onto Lakeshore Drive, he couldn't help but think of the stark contrasts he lived every day. One moment, he was a streetwise hustler seeking criminal connections. The next, he was a federal agent with a prime vantage point into the city's criminal underbelly. Yet, in the background of his mind, the memory of that confrontation with Officer Wilcox still simmered. It was a potent reminder that, no matter his skill or position, certain prejudices could compromise his safety in an instant. 1 week later, Wilcox received a letter from Internal Affairs. His disciplinary hearing was scheduled. Potential charges included unlawful stop, excessive use of force, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The hearing would include testimony from eyewitnesses, other officers, and potentially from Marcus Reynolds himself. Wilcox felt numb reading the official language. He confided in Larry Fields, his union representative. "They can't just fire me over one incident, right?" Fields frowned. "That depends on what they find. This is high profile, Darren. The mayor's under pressure. The DOJ is breathing down everyone's neck. If they decide to make an example out of you," Wilcox groaned. "I was just doing my job." Fields laid a heavy hand on Wilcox's shoulder. "I know, and maybe we can argue that. But the optics are bad. You pinned an undercover FBI agent against the wall without probable cause. The union will fight, but you need to be prepared." That night, Wilcox sat in his living room, the TV muted, lost in dark thoughts. He wondered if, in some twisted way, this was karma, the accumulation of all the times he'd acted on a hunch, never questioning his own biases. Now it was coming back to bite him harder than he could ever imagined. As the hearing date approached, Marcus received an official request to testify. Morrison handed him a folder containing subpoenas. "They want your account," the assistant director said. "This hearing could shape the future of policing in Chicago. Marcus, are you ready for that responsibility?" Marcus took a steadying breath. He knew the potential consequences. If his face appeared publicly, the criminals he was chasing might identify him. Yet, backing away wasn't an option. He wanted accountability, not just for himself, but for every person who'd been manhandled for loitering without cause. "I'll testify," Marcus said, voice firm. "But we need to protect the case I'm working on." Morrison nodded. "We'll coordinate with the DOJ and the local authorities. We'll try to keep your testimony confidential as much as possible, but Wilcox's union lawyers might push for an open hearing." Marcus grimaced. He'd cross that bridge when he got there. For now, he'd speak his truth, come what may. The day of the departmental hearing arrived. A nondescript meeting room in CPD headquarters was turned into an ad hoc courtroom, complete with a panel of police supervisors, IA officers, and a departmental lawyer. The union representative and Wilcox's lawyer sat at a table on one side. Wilcox, in a pressed suit that did little to hide his anxiety, sat beside them. On the other side was an IA representative, along with a DOJ observer. Marcus Reynolds, in his typical suit and tie worn for formal FBI business, quietly took a seat behind the IA table. A hushed murmur spread across the room at his arrival. Everyone knew this was the man Wilcox had tried to arrest. The hearing began with formalities. Then witnesses were called. Officer Gomez was first, and she recounted her version of events with a trembling voice. She admitted she saw no clear probable cause, but deferred to Wilcox out of fear and inexperience. Next, a bystander, who captured part of the incident on video, described how he saw Wilcox push Marcus against the wall despite minimal resistance. Then came Marcus's turn. He took the stand, nerves coiled in his stomach. The department's lawyer asked him to describe the night in question. Marcus spoke clearly, recounting how he was waiting for a contact, how Wilcox approached him, how the officer's tone was aggressive from the start. He described being pinned against the wall, the search, and only then revealing his FBI credentials. "Agent Reynolds, did you resist in any way?" the lawyer asked. Marcus shook his head. "No, I simply asked for an explanation and tried to maintain calm." Wilcox's lawyer then stood, eyes narrowed. "Agent Reynolds, isn't it true that you refused to provide identification immediately?" Marcus pursed his lips. "I provided a valid ID, which Officer Wilcox saw as suspicious." The lawyer pressed. "But you didn't disclose you were with the FBI until after the situation escalated, correct?" "Yes," Marcus agreed. Because I was undercover. Revealing my status prematurely could compromise my assignment. Wilcox's lawyer seized on that. So if you had simply told Officer Wilcox who you were, none of this would have happened. Isn't that true? Marcus met the lawyer's gaze coolly. You're implying that I'm at fault for being mistreated because I didn't reveal my FBI status soon enough. The truth is, I was standing on a sidewalk, minding my own business. That's not a crime. A hush fell in the room as Marcus's words sank in. The union lawyer tried to spin it further, but the panel's expressions suggested they weren't buying the argument that it was Marcus's fault for concealing his federal identity. The hearing paused for a brief recess, allowing everyone to regroup. After the break, Wilcox himself took the stand. He spoke in a subdued tone, not the brash cop who confronted Marcus weeks ago. I was following my training, he said, voice trembling slightly. The area had a high crime rate, and Agent Reynolds was standing there, acting suspicious. The departmental lawyer asked, what made him suspicious? Wilcox shifted in his seat. His posture, his clothing, the way he was checking his phone, he kept looking around. The lawyer nodded. Did you see him commit any crime? Talk to any known criminals? Was there any specific complaint called in about him? Wilcox swallowed. No direct complaints. But people had passed by him, giving him space. I suspected he might be waiting for something illegal. A panel member leaned forward. So your suspicion was based on his appearance and presence on a public sidewalk? Wilcox's face reddened. It was more than that. I've seen plenty of deals go down that way. The same panel member's voice held an edge of frustration. Officer, there must be a specific reason to initiate a stop. Looking around and wearing baggy clothes is not probable cause. Wilcox's gaze dropped. I thought I was acting for the safety of the community. The hearing concluded with closing statements, each side summarizing their arguments. Internal Affairs cited the multiple complaints against Wilcox, the absence of probable cause, and the racial bias implied in repeatedly targeting black men. Wilcox's counsel argued he was an experienced officer who merely made an error in judgment under ambiguous circumstances. Outside the hearing room, Marcus crossed paths with Wilcox. A brief, charged silence hung between them. Wilcox finally spoke, his voice low. I never set out to profile you or anyone. I was just trying to do my job. Marcus studied him, remembering the anger in the officer's eyes that night. Your job shouldn't involve assuming people are criminals because they look a certain way. It nearly destroyed an entire operation, and it could have ended worse. Wilcox looked down at the scuffed floor. I know, he said, voice cracking. I messed up. Marcus gave a curt nod. Yes, you did. With that, they parted. The wheels of justice would turn, and a decision would come in due time. 2 weeks later, the department announced its ruling. Officer Darren Wilcox was to be suspended indefinitely, pending possible termination. The official report cited a pattern of unwarranted stops, indicating racial bias and excessive use of force in the incident with Agent Reynolds. While not fully fired yet, Wilcox was effectively barred from active duty. The local media jumped on the story. Headlines read, Chicago cop suspended after targeting undercover FBI agent, and community leaders welcomed the decision as a step toward accountability. Meanwhile, the DOJ continued its broader investigation into the Chicago Police Department, hinting at reforms on the horizon. Wilcox watched the news coverage from home, shoulders slumped. Linda tried to comfort him, but the tension in their home was palpable. Their children asked why Daddy didn't wear his police uniform anymore. Wilcox had no easy answers. Maybe you should consider a different line of work, Linda finally said one evening. tears in her eyes. "Look at what this job is doing to our family," he sighed. "I don't know anything else." In contrast, Marcus advanced in his mission to crack the extortion ring. A break came when Oscar, the small-time hustler, revealed the location of a secret warehouse where major players collected the money. The FBI arranged a sting operation. Despite the risk of being recognized, Marcus agreed to participate. He donned his street persona one last time, stepping into the lion's den with a wire, ready to gather incriminating evidence. The bust proved successful. On a humid Thursday evening, FBI agents swooped in, arresting key members of the criminal network. Marcus's job was done. Morrison congratulated him, commending his bravery and resilience. "You kept your cool under enormous pressure," the assistant director said. "And you didn't let that police incident derail your focus." Marcus felt relief, along with a sense of closure. He had fulfilled his duty, both to the Bureau and to the city he genuinely wanted to protect. Even though he'd faced unjust treatment from one of its officers, he still believed in Chicago, believed it could become safer, fairer, and better. With the extortion ring dismantled, Marcus stood in the FBI's Chicago field office, gazing out at the skyline. Lights flickered across the city, from the grand high-rises of downtown to the neon signs of neighborhoods still grappling with crime. He thought about the road ahead, for the police department, for the criminals still lurking in dark corners, and for everyone caught in the crossfire. He'd done his part. The rest was up to the city's leadership, law enforcement, and citizens pushing for real, structural change. Maybe Wilcox's downfall would serve as a warning that reckless bias would no longer go unchecked. Maybe people like Officer Gomez, who yearned to do better, would become the future of policing. Marcus swallowed his complicated emotions, bitterness for what happened, pride for what he accomplished, hope for what could come next. Then he headed to the elevator, ready to finally go home. Hard, K-A-R-M-A-S, end. A few days later, Wilcox received final notice. Termination from the Chicago Police Department was recommended. His union struggled to negotiate any lesser punishment given the mounting evidence. The cop who once swaggered through the streets, confident in his authority, now stood unemployed, facing a tarnished reputation that might never fully recover. The city moved on, ushering in reforms that would hopefully prevent another Wilcox incident. And Marcus Reynolds continued his career with the FBI, holding on to the belief that justice, however slow, does eventually catch up with those who abuse their power. And that's the turbulent story of how a routine stop turned into a watershed moment for policing in Chicago, when one officer's misplaced suspicion clashed with the rightful mission of an undercover FBI agent. Prejudice and power collided, but out of the chaos emerged new accountability, renewed hope, and a reminder that justice can prevail if people are brave enough to demand it. If this story captivated you, if you found yourself rooting for Agent Reynolds and hoping Officer Wilcox would face the consequences, then join us in spreading the word. Share this video with your friends, family, and anyone else who might appreciate a gripping narrative about fairness, reform, and the pursuit of justice. By liking, commenting, and subscribing, you help us continue bringing powerful stories to light. Your support means everything, so smash that like button, ring the notification bell, and stay tuned for more.